Chris Taylor, my college friend. We were RAs together, and then he disappeared, and later in life on Facebook, I realized he was super smart. I had no idea he was so smart when I knew him in undergrad, and he went on and got his master's and his PhD. And now he's a super smart professor at Ohio State, and he has traveled the world to, I don't know, you share your curriculum and how to teach all the things that you teach. I'm not sure. Chris, you can brag about yourself, but I would also want to brag about he is a runner. He is streaking, just told me day 632, but it would have been much more than that, except for one fateful day that he was doing nerdy stuff like peer reviewing an article and ended up going to bed and forgot to run. Otherwise, it would be what day, Chris?
Probably close to 1,000.
Yeah. But he is an honest person who reset his streaking from that day. And anyway, he's got a lot of integrity, and he's a good runner. So he comes up to the Cleveland area. Well, he used to every once in a while for some races, but that might be a while. So I've always wanted him to come on a Saturday morning, but you know, he lives in Columbus, and that doesn't always really work out. And then with this whole Zoom ability, it just seemed like the right thing to ask and see if he would share his knowledge. So he has some questions that we've sent him ahead of time, and he's going to, I don't know, do a presentation, and then we'll take questions. So I think it's probably best if everybody puts themselves on mute while Chris is talking, and then we'll go from there. So Chris, it's all you.
All right. So apparently I'm deceptively smart. It's my scenario. So yeah, I'm originally from Zanesville, born and raised an hour away from Columbus. Went to Bowling Green with Brenda, ran there for 2 years, Achilles injury. Went to Arizona State for my master's and dietetic internship, and then Oklahoma State and for my PhD, and ended up an hour away from home. So I've been in Columbus for 16 years, now professor of medical dietetics in the College of Medicine, and also the director of our dietetics program. And I think 13 marathons. I can't tell you how many halves and everything else. The picture behind me was my last run in Alaska in September. So this literally was where we ran before we left in September. And I'm glad it wasn't this time around this year, because I don't think we'd be going. So I was gonna say, I don't see where Chris went. She may not be fact checking me as much at the moment, but oh, there she is. Okay. And so it's being recorded. So now they'll be taking away corners from my RD card as I talk about certain things. But there are certain things that we do as far as eating well, that we kind of have our rules about kind of what we promote and what we encourage to eat more in moderation. But then we have to discuss the types of needs that we have as a runner, or and ways that we can digest the food easily and we can run with it. My funny Bowling Green running story was one of my cross country teammates heard that eating grape nuts was good for you. And we know how much runners eat. So there's a bowl of cereal, and then there's a bowl of cereal. And if you increase grape nuts to eat 2 bowls of cereal, he could never understand why he couldn't finish an entire run and not have to stop and go to the bathroom. So these are the kinds of thought processes we have to go through in terms of, we got to eat, we got to fuel, but we have to eat and fuel responsibly. One, so we can make it through an entire run without needing a roll of toilet paper, and that we're getting enough fuel that will allow us to get all the way through the run and not have digestive issues. So in kind of I was looking through the different questions that were coming through, and I'll kind of hit on some of those as we go through. I'll also take more questions as we go along. And if you have anything that you're burning, but you might forget, throw it in the chat, and then we will be able to scroll back through in case I miss anything. I have what was on the Facebook notification. But what I always like to say is my cross country coach in high school always used to say, you can't run a top fuel dragster on low lead gas. And he told us that in junior high. He told us that in high school. I had no intentions of a career as a dietitian or anything else, but he was one of those people, one of those coaches. It was like, you have to have your family life right. You have to have a spiritual life. You have to focus on school. You have to do your training. You have to eat well. You have to sleep. So there's no magic to being able to just skimp on everything else and train and allow you to get to that end point. He always used to tell us, when you're going to the races and you got to pack your satchel, remember to bring your good snacks and things like that. So that was kind of ingrained in us early. And then as I've worked more and more, I've got a joint appointment in family medicine. I work at the family medicine doc who has been trying to run and eat, and I always told him, you can't outrun your mouth. And all right, so how many people here eat or run so you can eat what it is that you want to eat? Probably the number one reason most people run, yes. So it helps, and it probably helps from becoming 400 pounds if you eat the way you really want to eat. And if you want to know how that really pans out, taper for a race and try not to eat everything in the house and try not to gain that extra 400 pounds before the race starts. But we need to look at it kind of as balancing a scale. You've got how much energy you need for the day. Then you need how much energy do you need to spend, how much energy do you spend actually running? And if you're eating here and expending here, that energy's got to come from somewhere. So it's always this conundrum. And there was a series of articles going around about 2 years ago. Runner's World, I think, had 3 or 4 of them, and they just kind of kept bouncing around everywhere about the whole weight loss and running type scenario. It's like, well, I want to cut back on my food so I can lose weight, but now I have troubles with my running because I need to be able to fuel myself. So what we're looking for is that kind of personal sweet spot so that you can meet your energy needs for the day, but then also meet that extra energy that you need to run and support your training. Because anything that you do that takes you below that level of how much you need to really sustain your training means you're going to be pulling from your reserves. And the more we pull from our reserves, the less metabolically feasible it is for us to continue to train and build, and then that's when injuries start to happen. So part of it is listening to our body, listening to hunger, making wise choices about what we eat so that we can meet our protein needs, our carbohydrate needs, and our fat needs. And yes, we do have fat needs. We do have carbohydrate needs, and we do have protein needs. But listening to our bodies so that, one, we can make sure that we're fueling ourselves and fueling ourselves with the things we need. So I hear an awful lot about going keto and things like that. Your body needs a certain amount of carbohydrate to continue to fuel you. And if you don't provide yourself enough fuel, how many of you believe you could drive to LA from Cleveland on a half a tank of gas? It's not going to be a feasible option to be able to fuel your machine to get the running output that you're looking for while also making sure that you're meeting your energy needs. So that becomes kind of one of those first key levels. It's just, am I eating enough? And if I'm not eating enough, you're going to start to wear yourself down. You're going to start to feel more tired because you have that gap in energy. And it also then means you're putting yourself at a greater risk for injury. So too much weight loss along the way can give you an indication that you're not meeting that energy gap and you're kind of pulling from your own self as a fueling source. So that kind of hits at the broader picture around that. And then it gets into the more specifics around how do you then meet those energy needs, identify what you can eat, how you tolerate that, what works for you, and then creating that formula to support yourself. So how many of you are, I got to get out and run in the morning? Got a small, about a third of you. And then evening runners, whenever in the heck you can get out the door kind of scenario. Right now it's COVID, and as my colleague said, we're not working from home, we're living at work. So I tend to set my 4:30 cap on the day so that I can get out and run when I don't have my runs scheduled. But being able to make that process work, if you're starting to think about, okay, I'm a morning runner, I got to make sure I'm fueled and can walk out the door with my tanks somewhat close to topped off. So you have dinner at 6:30, you have a snack at 8:30, probably a snack at 10:30, and you go to sleep. You had dinner at 6:30, you get up at 6:30 the next morning. It has now been 12 hours since the time you ate dinner before you were going to run in the morning. So we're thinking about the fact that we've topped off our tanks 12 hours ago, and now we're going to go out for a run in the morning. So we're going to either need to top off our tanks with some kind of breakfast or eat breakfast, have an ability for you to digest it a little bit, and then go out and run. So setting yourself up in situations like that, understanding when is it that you're eating, kind of how are your meals spaced out, and then if you're going to run in the morning, you're basically going to have been fasting for 12 hours. So you got to think about topping off the tank. So this is the one time you're going to hear a dietitian say, Pop-Tarts is a great option. And I have a lot of Pop-Tarts. I have no stock in Kellogg or whoever makes them. But you're looking for something with a base of carbohydrate, but a simple carbohydrate. You don't want too much fiber, because I don't think I need to tell you what happens if you have too much fiber before you go out and run. And if you drink water and add that onto your fiber, it just has the log flume ride. So we want to make sure that we take something easily digestible, so it's not going to kind of cause a problem in your GI system as you're going along. Easy to break down. So Pop-Tarts give you kind of the white flour, easy to break down, easily digestible, and then a little bit of extra protein and fat are kind of infused in there. So it helps slow down the digestive process a little bit and helps it last a little bit longer. So Pop-Tarts can do this. Tends to be the ones that are like the cinnamon sugar, have a little bit less fat and a little bit more protein than some of the other kind of solid sugar ones. Toast with peanut butter or some kind of nut butter on it. Frozen waffles are great for that, because you can take them out, stick them in the toaster, you get some peanut butter on it, it helps easy spread. But figuring out what it is that works for you and that you can tolerate. Some people do well just having a bowl of cereal with milk. Others, gastric evacuation occurs if you have milk anytime close to before running. So figuring out what it is that helps you kind of bridge that gap between 6:30 dinner and running in the morning, of something that's going to be a manageable source, not too much. My personal regimen is about a Pop-Tart and a half. And I can usually take the package, pop it in half, pop it in quarter, pull it out, eat it without getting crumbs all over me while I drive on the way there. And then making sure I'm drinking water. So then if you're running at different times throughout the day, you're going to need to start thinking about what is it that you're putting in your system 3 to 4 hours before you're supposed to run. Because if you're a before dinner runner, your lunch is going to have a considerable impact on what your run is going to be like. The hotter it is, the more likely what you eat for lunch is going to have an impact on what it is that you consume. So your higher fat meals that you have for lunch on a hot situation like we're dealing with right now are going to have a little bit of a longer impact when it goes to your 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock run when you go out to run. So kind of starting to think about what is it that I'm eating beforehand, and your higher protein and your higher fat are going to have a slightly longer amount of time for digestion compared to a higher carbohydrate meal. So they'll have a tendency to move through your system a little bit faster. So you have that pasta dinner before the marathon, and you go out to eat at 6 o'clock, and you're like, I don't want any meat on it. I'm running a marathon tomorrow. By 10 o'clock, you're hungry, right? So the having protein and having fat helps slow down that digestive process. But then it works for you in the opposite direction if you have pizza for lunch, and not just one slice, because we're runners and we can't just have one slice. We got to have 3 slices for lunch. Now that's the protein and the fat that's starting to sit in your system that now will impact you later on in time for the run. So thinking about when is it that you're going to run and planning accordingly, that if it's been too long, like a morning run, topping off your tank in such a way that it's easily digestible and kind of helps bring those blood sugar levels back up, get you prepared for that run. But if you're going to be doing it later in the day, how is it that what you're eating leading up to that will help you be prepared to run, both in terms of your energy levels, but then also the foods that you'll be able to tolerate as a part of that. So kind of looking at what some of the questions were in terms of being able to manage how your what you're eating throughout the day, and kind of looking at it from your macro level. Our main recommendations beyond just running, but for the general population, is to do more about spreading our protein out throughout the day, instead of having like next to none at breakfast, a little bit at lunch, and then a massive bolus for dinner, and then popcorn or chocolate for snack before we go to bed, kind of thing. But looking at ways of spreading our protein and our carb and our fat sources out throughout the day will help you kind of avoid those spikes and drops that you're already going to need a bunch of snacks in between anyway, because that's how runners eat. But being able to add protein at breakfast, I mean, things like yogurt are a great way to be able to add protein in the morning, because we have a tendency to eat much more carbohydrate heavy at breakfast, and then lunch a little bit more combined. So that if we can spread out that protein, spread out the fat, it helps the digestive, kind of delay the digestive process, so your food lasts a little longer. How many of you have a breakfast, you decide to have cereal at 8:30, and by 10 o'clock you're ravenous? Having something to kind of delay that process. Also adding oatmeal is a high fiber, so fiber will also help kind of slow down that process. But if you're planning on running at noon, think about what having a large bowl of oatmeal might do for you, and especially how well you've kind of adapted to that process. So we want to the carbohydrate composition. The more we have a higher need for carbohydrates to continue to fuel the process. And if you kind of think about the way that we manage carbohydrates, you basically have a bucket. Your liver has the ability to save up your carbohydrates, we put them in, and then the longer we go between eating, we start pulling out of that bucket to feed our cells, our brain, our kidneys, and all of those. So then we need to put carbohydrates back in so that we're ready for activity, and then that's when we start pulling. So we have our carbohydrate reserve. The consumption of complex carbohydrates are a better healthy choice, looking at your whole grains compared to simple sugars. So we're going to be looking more at our whole grains like brown rice, wheat bread, whole grain pasta. And then kind of our next step back gets us into white bread, white rice. And then when we get down to the actual simple sugars, the added sugars are our less desirable source. The simple sugars get absorbed very quickly and lead to a quick spike in blood glucose and then come back down. We have to then manage it to come back down. Whereas our more complex sources of carbohydrate take a little bit longer and allow us to kind of bring them in, manage them, and then put them away. So that's where we're going to be focusing a little bit more on kind of trying to spread our carbohydrate out throughout the day and having better sources so we can manage those spikes and kind of continue to top off our tanks and not have to kind of like top it off, steal some, top it off, steal some, top it off, steal some from our more simple sugar type sources. It's just, I should have organized the questions a little bit more in terms of, okay. So getting into a little bit more about kind of the preparation for activity, the preparation for races, and that recovery afterwards. You can kind of think about when we're running, basically, everybody has to deal with charging your phone, right? And I got to make sure before I leave the house, I got a full battery because I'm going to be texting. And what happens when you leave the house and you got 25% battery left? Everybody you know is going to have a crisis and is going to text you about something. And your battery goes. So before we run, we want to make sure we're topped off and ready for the workout. Because otherwise, we're going to be running and going, I'm at 48%. I'm at 36%. There's my 15%. So we want to make sure that we're not worried about our energy level, make sure we're topped off. Once you've gone through and you've had the texting crisis about what color socks somebody should truly be wearing with the shoes that they just bought, and should they have gotten the 12s or the 13s of whatever the model was because they had the other ones that were on sale versus not, sucked all the life out of your battery, you have to top back off. And we've got kind of this optimal window of being able to get refueled during this time. So it's a carbohydrate window, but we also have a need for protein and fat within the process. A lot of the research now really points more towards chocolate milk. Like, yes, chocolate after a run, success. Chocolate milk with the the composition of the milk sugar, and then the kind of moderate amount of sugar from the chocolate, and then the protein and the fat from the milk have kind of been this perfect concoction of a recovery beverage that you can take that you typically very much enjoy when you're done, um, so that you can fill that gap once you're finished. Um, so whatever it may be and whatever you can manage, but the important part is getting something back in, especially after your long runs. Now, if you're going out for 3 miles around the neighborhood that you probably could have ran backwards faster, you're not in such a state of crisis to be able to fill that window. But especially on your speed workouts and your tempos and on your long runs where you're putting out a longer exertion of time, that's when you really want to make sure that you've got one, fluids to be refueling, especially in the summer, and then something to gnaw on afterwards. I will tell you from personal experience, certain types of granola bars in the winter are not easy on your teeth if you leave them in your car. Just one of those things you probably didn't think about until you took the wrapper off and broke off 3 of your teeth trying to eat it so you could fuel when you were done. So those kinds of considerations start to pop up. In the summer, I have one of those coolers that's about this big, and my best investment from last summer was a countertop ice maker. I make ice, I stick it in a Ziploc bag, I throw it in the freezer. Make more, I stick it in another gallon freezer bag, I stick it in the freezer. And then when I want to make a cooler, I take it out, I stick my 2 bottles of whatever I need for refueling, dump the ice on top, put a little bit of water on it, and now I've got a cooler with cold beverage, ice, and take towels along, and I can dry off. I can cool myself off. I now have 2 cold things, which could be chocolate milk, could be whatever your sports drink of choice, whatever it may be. If you're mixing up Tailwind and you want that for recovery, but mix it up, have it ready, then you can just layer it into your cooler and you're good to go. I know some people who use like Pedialyte and Pediasure. I know other people who use chocolate milk. It comes down to what are the things that work out well for you and you can tolerate. I know there are a handful of people that basically can't tolerate anything when they're done eating. So you need to find whatever is basically kind of least viscous and least offensive to your system as you finish. But the importance of filling that window afterwards is very important. And then leading up to those activities is how we top off the tank before we get there. I'm one of those people. I function at a coffee level of here all the time. And I always have to think about that when I get into race week, because there's a phrase, you don't buy coffee, you rent it. So when you're drinking something that dehydrates you, hydration becomes part of the thing you have to consider and leading up into that. And then also your choices around carbohydrate loading. I'll just say that there's some differing opinions on the science around like completely dropping off all of your carbohydrate and then re-topping off the tank and like it's going to change the capacity. But starting to think about making smart choices within the day or two before your big event. Why 2 days? What's the most important night of sleep before your race? 2 nights before. Why? Because you're not going to sleep the night before. Oh my gosh, I gotta run tomorrow. And kind of the same thing. The closer you get, the more antsy you get, the more it's going to kind of impact your nerves and things like that. So there's recommendations for basically the day before your event, a dinner-sized lunch and a lunch-sized dinner to kind of flip the way, because you don't want to be too heavy on the night before so that you, one, impact your sleep and all the potential challenges that might come from a large meal. But also in making that lunch-sized dinner, it's kind of what I mentioned before, making sure that it's something that gets you through the night. Because pasta with a little bit of olive oil in a little bowl, you're going to be starved by the time you go to bed, which means what are you going to feel like when you get up in the morning? Even worse. And then you're going to try and eat everything you can, and now your stomach's laden with food. So looking at those protein sources to make sure that you got something that helps sustain that meal more through the evening. And a friend of mine was getting ready to run Boston. It was the Monday after Easter. He's like, well, I'm staying with friends or with family, and we're going to have Easter dinner, and then I can't have any wine because I'm going to be running tomorrow. I said, why can't you have wine? Well, I don't want to get dehydrated. I say, how much wine are you planning to drink? Well, 1 glass. 1 glass of wine is not going to dehydrate you, and it's probably going to reduce your anxiety you're feeling about the race. So being able to kind of factor those things in, if you're going to have a glass of wine, have an extra glass of water to then help deal with your hydration status, and use it for kind of the function that it's going to provide for you. So prepping beforehand, starting to lean a little bit more towards a carbohydrate dense sources. Before our long runs, it's basically, so what do we want tonight? Potatoes, rice, or pasta? And vary it. Because by marathon week, you're going to be so sick of spaghetti with meat sauce and veggies and a salad on Saturday night or Friday night. Rotate your selections so that you can, one, experiment with things that may work better for you than others, identify some of your triggers. It could be that some of the pasta sauce might be giving you some of that indigestion that you're having the next day on the run. So if you're starting to have problems when you're running, heartburn, indigestion, hiccups, things like that, it might be linked back to peppers or tomato sauce or onions or other things that you may react to more so on long runs than you would otherwise. So that variety helps you kind of identify what works for you and what doesn't. And then just kind of getting back to some of the other questions around the post recovery and the importance of kind of tracking what you're eating and making sure that you're fueling enough, because if you don't meet the threshold of how much you need to expend, you're going to take it from yourself. And that's more likely where we're going to start to see injury issues and muscle breakdown when, if we don't eat enough, our bodies will eat our muscles as one method of feeding ourselves in the process. And that's probably not good if it comes from your legs. And that becomes no more true at mile 24 in a marathon than it does anywhere else. But also the hydration side. And basically following your thirst, drinking when you're thirsty, and evaluate your urine. If it looks like orange Kool-Aid, you may need to drink some more water. And if it still looks like orange Kool-Aid, you might need to drink 1 less cup of coffee and drink some more water, kind of scenario. Because your fluid electrolyte balance can then also lead to cramping and those issues. But when you end up with cramping, do you maintain your normal gait? You go into a limp and you hop. And I got a cramp in my left calf, which made me hobble on my right leg. which strained my right hamstring, which screwed up my marathon in California International Marathon because it was a hot day and I had one more cup of coffee than I normally did. So hydration can be just as much of an important strategy in preventing injury as your other eating habits. So I think from there, that gives us about 20 minutes to capture anything that I didn't and questions that are coming in and become more dialogue and less of me kind of going
Thank
on.
you. Thank you, Chris. And thank you for sharing that. Well, I'll just admit, well, this will be the stand up. I'm a physical therapist and I get running injuries. So I like that, you know, a dietitian could have some electrolyte imbalances and cramps that, you know, may affect his race because he had a little too much coffee. So that's how we learn, right?
Yep.
It's human nature. We push our boundaries, and if you don't push your boundaries, you never learn kind of what you're capable of. So I'm glad you could share, you know, some of those things that happen because it could happen to any one of us. I know there were some questions in here. The Pop Tart, you surprised me with the Pop Tart reference because, and it took me back to Bowling Green because I ate a lot of Pop Tarts in college. I can't say that I'm eating a lot of Pop Tarts now, although that sugar, the brown sugar cinnamon one, those were my favorite. So when you have, is that like too much sugar compared to a piece of toast? Like my go-to is an English muffin with peanut butter. Mm-hmm. So how do you look at like how much sugar, carbs, you know, what's better for you?
Yeah. The nice part about it is like the brown sugar cinnamon, if you look at the other ones, like the s'mores and the strawberry and the cherry and all that, they're so dense on the filling. And then they've got so much extra icing and then they got more chocolate or more sugar sprinkled on that. The brown sugar is still kind of like a lower level of like sweetness compared to many of the others. That it gives you mostly the white flour pastry, which for the most part is about the same as your English muffin.
Okay.
White flour, baked differently. One went and baked and the other one went and baked. But still white flour composition. And the sugar is kind of a modest enough amount to give you something that you can enjoy that doesn't taste, because think about what that Pop-Tart would taste like, or when you get the corner piece that just has the white flour, it's like you're chewing on paste. And no one enjoys that, nor would you want to run after that. So you won't end up with too much of a spike from that, but there's still enough kind of a protein from the flour and then the fat that they use in terms of making the pastry that doesn't allow it to just kind of spike completely, but it kind of helps taper that response. And in reality, you eat that English muffin, it's a long string of glucose linked together. And when you digest it, it's all going to ultimately come down to those individual sugars. It just takes a little bit longer because you have to go through the digestion process to break that English muffin down into sugar. So it will all get there. It just takes a little bit longer. So if you take a giant spoonful of sugar and use that as your source, it's going to go in, up, and back down. When you eat English muffin or toast or, you know, Pop-Tart with not a whole lot, or even I go waffles or whatever, it's going to be something that's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to be a little slower release. I'm not looking for a lot. Sometimes half of an English muffin is kind of enough if you're not extremely hungry and that sort, and put a little bit of peanut. So this isn't like peanut butter this thick. This is like a good mild covering without, if you can eat it and not have to talk like this, that's kind of your taste, your talking test for peanut butter on that. Because if it's so much that it sticks to the roof of your mouth and you have troubles talking, it's going to kind of be too much in terms of fat in your system, unless you're one of those people that can run on anything in your stomach. And very few people are like that. So you kind of have to figure out where your balance is.
So most people probably are consuming, I guess because some of the questions about the Pop-Tarts, maybe thinking that was like high in sugar, but really probably a lot of what we're eating is the same amount basically. And it's just all about what our bodies can digest. And if the Pop-Tart works for you, it's because then your stomach probably doesn't feel like you ate something heavy, right?
Mm-hmm. But if you eat some of those, and it's kind of that experiment. If you eat one of the brown sugar cinnamon and you just kind of feel fine, I tend to feel fairly normal afterwards. But if I eat one of the other ones, like if I ended up, they didn't have those and I got another, I can kind of feel that a little bit more in that spike from those. And you kind of feel it early because it happens, but because you've got the rest of the Pop Tart that's there, besides this, like you get the little rush from the sugar that's in there, and then everything else kind of follows in behind and you kind of even out, but you still have that little peak in there.
Well, and Chris, I'm curious what sports drink is your go-to sports drink? If it's something like Tailwind has a lot more carbohydrates in it. And I guess it would depend maybe on how long you're running.
Yeah. And see, I have the issue of, so I paced for the front runner group and I kind of have to choose my gel appropriately. And if I decide, well, I probably need a little bit more sodium in that, and I take a drink of Gatorade or I take it on the course, you'll hear me hiccuping within the next half mile. And you just hear it in my system and I just have to deal with. So it's like I can't handle Gatorade. I can do Gatorade like afterwards, but I can't do it during the race. So I'll do a Tailwind if I'm trail running for a longer period of time because it's kind of mild enough that it won't give me those challenges. But I have to choose my gels accordingly for what works with my system. I've had gastric evacuation too many times during races from just having to take the gels that you need and your system just revolts. And so there was another question about what are things that you can eat. One of the guys in my group was like, man, the gels just make me sick and I just can't do it. It's like it's something that's going to make you vomit will not make you race faster. No matter how many times you tell yourself it's what you need. He's like, but the oatmeal raisin cookies usually work for me, so I can carry them in a bag or gummy bears. He's like, is that okay? It's like, can you eat them and can you tolerate them? He's like, yeah. Do they make you sick? No. Well, then if you need it, you need to find what it is that works for you. But when you're making that decision, just think about that kind of protein and that carbohydrate and the fat composition, because if you decide that taking fish oil tablets is your way to do it, one, it's not going to give a carbohydrate, and two, it's going to be a reaction to fat that you're not going to enjoy. So thinking about those, and oatmeal raisin cookies do have oatmeal in them, which is putting fiber into the system. And fiber only has one way to be managed, and that's to come back out. So consider that in your choices of products. But yeah, I've been actually marathon training for 15 years now. Ran my first one in 05, Columbus in 05, first half in 05. And it's been a continual process of figuring out what works, trying out the gels. I actually do well with sport beans. They don't give me problems, but I can't breathe and chew them at the same time. Because it's like, and they get stuck in my teeth and everything else. So it's like you got to find what works and what you can manage and what you can also carry with you. I was losing my pants during the first 2 miles of the California International because I had my gels in there and everything else and couldn't tie my drawstring tight enough to hold my gels and my MP3 player and everything. So figuring out the process.
So what about the question here about how do you drink more water without flushing away electrolytes? I know for me, like I like to eat fruit during the weeks leading up to long runs and watermelon and cantaloupe and pineapple, things like that to kind of give you a little bit more fluid without maybe just Well, I just have a hard time just drinking plain water. Some people are good at it. I'm not.
Yeah. Typically our challenge isn't drinking too much and flushing things away. And you can kind of tell our hydration status by probably through the water treatment plants. But we also don't particularly have an issue with sodium in our diets. So we do, for the most part, manage most of our electrolytes. If it's something that you are concerned about, then even if it's something like drinking a Gatorade but making it half strength, you can add in more water. You can add one of those in, and that's one of the things that I do is I'll just add some of the like water sports drinks or like the zero. So I'm not basically drinking a sugar sweetened beverage, but I'm kind of topping off on all the fluids. I'm one of those really heavy sweaters. I'm not a desirable person to run with in the summer, which means weighing yourself before the long run and weighing yourself when you get back gives you an indication of just how much water you've lost. And then being able to kind of know how much you've lost as far as fluid, because if you ran and the only thing you did was run, and that difference that you're getting is basically sweat loss, it gives you a way to kind of assess just how much of your fluid you've lost and how much you need to replace. Becomes an important kind of metric to assess where you are. And then as the day goes on, how much do you kind of bring that back? Just kind of look at it the next day also to make sure, because you do a long run, you run 20, you sweat like crazy, you lose 4 pounds of water weight, maybe. You eat everything in the kitchen. Now you got all the food in your system that you're weighing. After you void in the morning, then get on the scale again the next day. And it kind of helps you kind of figure out where you are back to kind of that post-meal evacuation, where you are. And if you're still kind of tailing down the opposite direction, especially after long runs, it gives you an indication of kind of how much more water weight do you have to make back up to get yourself rehydrated from those. But we never think about it until about mile 2, and it's like, crap, I was going to weigh myself this morning. So put it in your calendar. You have your alarm set for 6:15. You put it in your calendar for 6:25. That way you hit snooze once. You went to the bathroom. Now you're up, you're in the bathroom where the scale is, and you're getting reminded to weigh yourself so that then you can track it.
All right, Chris, what about this question about from Leslie about how she's craving salt through the week, but she doesn't want to eat potato chips? Because I know Leslie is a healthy person. She doesn't want to be eating much potato chips. But what else can we eat that has maybe more sodium in it besides McDonald's and Taco Bell and all those bad things?
It's actually very difficult to avoid salt in our diets. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And if you eat anything processed, most likely you're getting a decent dose of sodium. So this is one of those things where I don't shy away as much from, like, if you're eating eggs, put a little salt on it for flavor. It also gives the ability to control how much you're adding, as opposed to if you eat chips, you're dealing with whatever sodium they have as part of it. But if you're making eggs and you're having that kind of need, you can control how much goes on, which also means put it on your hand first so you can see how fast it's coming out, and then you can sprinkle it from your hand as opposed to, holy crap, that comes out fast. To be able to manage it. Kind of the same thing when you cook with salt, you add a teaspoon of salt to the boiling water and you cook everything, you don't taste anything. If you add a small portion of that to what you're eating and it's on there, you actually are more likely to detect the flavor. So the things that kind of get lost within the recipe and dissipated, sometimes you then feel like you need to add more because you don't have it there. Um, Kind of gives you the ability to add some and then look for other seasonings that you can kind of use to bolster up the flavor profile, and then also give yourself a little bit of the sodium so you don't have to get it all from there. Um, and it kind of goes against all of your inner dietitian to say, you know, it's okay to use a little bit of table salt and things like that. But we also have to consider the fact that we have other special needs, especially if you're a heavy sweater like I am and you go like this and you feel like you just had microdermabrasion from getting the sweat off your forehead. So,
Chris,
yes.
I crave a lot of salt. I mean, it's not just food seasoning, a lot of salt.
What does your doctor say about that, Leslie? I mean, I don't know. Is that something that is new, or is that something you've always had?
Yeah, it's something I've always had. The doctor said, you know, just eat. I used to eat it off my hand. You just sprinkle it on my hand and eat it.
Well, Jeff runs with some pink Himalayan sea salt, so you can be like Jeff. Yeah.
He also suggested pickles too, but I just wondered what you thought about high salt craving.
Yeah. That's not something I've experienced much, and part of it is it a flavor profile that we have a tendency to be kind of innately attuned to, or could it be something metabolic that's actually driving your need for it in terms of
my metabolism has been checked and I have very, very low metabolism. So is salt a spike for that?
Well, I'm thinking in terms of how your body utilizes electrolytes and like how your kidney clears and how your body utilizes them. If it's a kind of the hormones that are involved in that, there are so many things that happen within the body that drive everything else. It's amazing how much of our body functions based on the movement of sodium, potassium, and calcium. It's like everything in the body works because sodium, potassium, and calcium went that way. So there may be a lot of different drivers of things that might be happening there that sometimes the cravings are a function of metabolic need, like hunger, as opposed to taste preferences and things like that. So I wouldn't go too far on too many recommendations without more detail in that regard.
Leslie, I think he just said that you're special. So we all kind of knew how special that you are. So another unique quality about Leslie. So, okay, so I know Mary had some questions about sugar with the different gels. And I mean, when we say sugar and carbohydrates, we're kind of saying the same thing, right?
Right. And there seems to be a really big to do about what types of sugar different gels have that all break down to their basic sugars. And I mean, I've not seen a direct level of evidence that talks about any of the very particular ones that say that one drives a different kind of metabolic profile and function than the others.
I might have a little bit of a different case though too. I had bariatric surgery.
Mm-hmm.
So anything with added sugars, so like something as sweet as a Pop-Tart would probably make me throw up. So
Mm-hmm.
like ice cream, I can have maybe 1 spoon.
Yeah.
So I've found that as long as the added sugars are really low or non-existent,
Right.
I'm usually, my body will handle it okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have the quantity issue too.
Yeah, quantity and basically the response to recognizing it, and it's not been acclimated to that. It's very similar to, it's like you eat so well all the time and then it's like, I just want chicken wings one night, and then you have chicken wings and you put all that fat in your system and you're just like, oh. So your body adapts to the way that you eat as well. So when you're dealing with gels and things like that, if you have that kind of sensitivity, basically the gels are just not going to be a viable option if you
Well, hammer gel works for me, actually. There's only, depending upon which flavor, 2 to 4 grams of sugar in it. So that one works for me. I haven't found any others that did, though.
Right. So you just gonna have to figure out what works. Which, to the racing point, nothing new on race day. So your long runs are a chance to practice what you need. So if you're normally doing a bagel and peanut butter and you're traveling somewhere, get that bagel and you decide you like Panera bagels or Leonard's bagels or Bruegger's bagels, you get one. And if you're going to be traveling somewhere and you don't know if you'll have it, stick it in a bag and take it with you. Stick it in the freezer, then stick it in the bag and take it with you. So then you can try and keep it more viable longer. Get the little small thing of peanut butter that you can take with you so that you can have the peanut butter that works for you on that morning. Because if it doesn't work for you on a 12 miler and it makes you sick, it's not going to behave any differently during a race. So the same thing is, oh, well, Columbus Marathon is giving out cliff shots. Well, I've been training with goo, but I don't want to have to carry it, so I'll take the cliff shots during the race. You don't know how you'll respond, and they're all a little bit different. So you got to figure out what it is that works for you and then follow that path consistently. And sometimes it just takes experimentation. I've been buying e-gels online. They're a little bit more fluid-like, and they taste like a Jolly Rancher concentrated. So it takes a little getting used to, but it's the one of the ones that I found that I could manage, because many of the ones that I could manage before, they don't sell around here anymore. You can't get them. So it's always that kind of level of experimentation. And then sometimes that means buying the small box and sharing amongst each other when you're actually allowed to see each other, so that you can find out what works. Because it's not worth, I bought a box of 24, I ate one, it made me sick and I can't use them.
So Chris, can you tell us, I know that you run in a running group. Let me tell you a little secret about our running group. Sometimes when we have our long runs, people tend to not eat anything because, you know, that whole, what should I put in my body? I'm not really sure how this is going to work. And so it's kind of easy to end up running 10, 12 miles and maybe you didn't actually consume anything. But what harm are we doing to ourselves when we go, you know, 10, 15, 18 miles and we're not really putting any fuel in our body?
Right. So my general rule for myself is about 90 minutes is my cap before I feel like I need to bring something with me. I'll go out for a 90-minute run and I'll do it. And if it's not hot, I shouldn't as much, but don't have to carry too much water. I don't have to carry gel. I don't have to carry those things. But as I get farther, your system holds so much. Oh, gotta get back in my view here. System holds so much, and as you run, you're pulling out of your tank. And when your tank empties, what are you running on? Our most efficient way is a little bit of carbohydrate and a little bit of fat burning at the same time. And if you're running too fast and you're gasping for air, you're much more in need of the carbohydrate coming out of your liver than you're relying on your fat to burn. Your long distance runs are a process of getting your body used to time on feet and efficiently burning both carbohydrate and fat as a way to continue to fuel on kind of your short-term, long-term burn. It's kind of like when your solar power runs out, you start going off of the candle, and then how much you can kind of work those two things together. But as you start running out of your glycogen stores in your liver and out of your muscles, now you have to start relying on other sources of energy. And now you basically cut your energy source in half to fuel your run. And 90 minutes or so in, depending on what pace you're running, how far are you getting in 90 minutes? 7 to 10 miles, and now you're doing 15. You're now running half of your run without fuel, which means it's not going to be quality. It's going to look for other places to get fuel to continue to fuel it. And then it becomes even more imperative to have something to fuel you afterwards, to replenish. So this is where you start getting into issues about potential injury. You're wearing yourself down. You're running off of, basically you're running on fumes, literally. And the more you continue to do that, you're basically taking away the training that you're trying to get for the long runs, and you're turning it into a metabolic challenge instead of an endurance building activity that allows you to be ready for your race. Your goal for marathon training is to get to the starting line healthy and ready to race. If you're running too fast each week, you're racing every week that you're getting ready to race. By the time you get there, you're either going to be injured or wore out, and you're not going to have that. And if you're not fueled enough to do it, you're going to take what is supposed to be basically a long, easy run that's preparing you for the marathon and making it more of an arduous task that challenges you more metabolically and takes you longer to recover during the week from that same run than it is to have taken it easy and been fueled and be able to kind of get through it, recuperate, and be back to kind of where you are or better.
So if I could just take that section of what you just said and have that, like, have everybody understand it, because I think we've all made this mistake, and it's really easy when we're not sure how these gels are going to affect our stomach and what should I do. And the answer is usually, well, I just won't do anything. And I think from my own experience, learning that actually the gel made me better, feel better, and run better. So we have to think about, you just put it in really nice terms, to think about what we're trying to get out of that run. Mm-hmm. And I think Linda's question here about race day anxiety and nerves, when you're standing on the start line, does that make you burn through like breakfast faster? Does that change anything if we ate, peanut butter and toast? Should we eat something else?
I don't know that it's going to have that drastic of an impact unless you're doing this for 2.5 hours while you're standing there waiting, which is either waiting in line for the porta potty or nervous bouncing.
Well, sometimes it's cold at the start of the race. I've jumped up and down at Columbus before when it's been really cold. And when they play Thunderstruck, Terry and I are jumping up and down.
Yeah. The small amount of what you get from that in comparison to, if you consider how much activity you're doing in that movement in the corral where you're packed in and you only have a chance to kind of move this way anyway, is going to pale in comparison to the actual quantity of movement you're going to get from the marathon and things like that. So, but being nervous and things like that are going to exacerbate any of the gastrointestinal challenges that you might already have from foods you don't react to well, which is the other reason to start practicing on your long runs when they're like 6, 8, and 10 miles. That means if you take it at 6 and you're doing 8 and it makes your stomach kind of you got 2 miles to get back. You can most likely get through it and be fine. And you know to kind of choose something else. But it gives you the ability to practice those, even if you're doing kind of a somewhat longer run during the week. Let's say you're doing a 6-mile run, take it to mile 5. See how your stomach reacts. You don't really need topped off at 5 miles, but it gives you the ability to kind of practice and know which one you're going to react to. I could ask any one of you and you can tell me, what shorts do you wear for your long run? What socks do you wear for your long run? And what shirt is it that you can't wear for anything more than 12 miles because it chafes you here, 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 and here? Because we do it, we know which shorts we can wear for the 2-miler, which one we can wear for the 4-miler, which shoes do I wear for the 12, what one do I use for the 18? We kind of start getting the same thing with our food, especially being able to kind of test what gels work. And the more you kind of practice, also the more your system kind of gets used to the introduction, taking fluid with it. It's like I see the aid station when I know I need to take it. That's when I get the gel out and take it. So when I get there, I can then have suitable water to take down with it. So I haven't just dumped a bunch of sugar in my gut and let it sit there. Then I've like prepared, come into a water station, get my gel out, take it, take water with it. Don't pound the entire glass of water because then you're going to slosh and mix, but enough that kind of helps you manage the gels that you're taking so you're not dumping pure sugar in, but then being able to kind of figure out what that right mix is for you.
So the next question from Jeff is about fats and nuts, and is that a good idea during the race? So you just talked about gel and all of that, but what about if you took a handful of nuts? What would that do to you?
Well, so M&Ms are a slightly different story because they're more of a chocolate and have the sugar in them and that sort for a carbohydrate source. As far as just plain nuts, they're more of a protein and fat, so they're not going to give you that carbohydrate source that you need. So they won't really serve that role, but that's a great option for during the week, especially if you have a little bit of that salt craving, to just have the lightly salted nuts, and then to be able to get those, you get your essential fats, you get a protein source during the day, because most of the time, what do we eat for snacks? It's not anything. If you put them all together, it wouldn't be a meal. But if you were to start introducing more things like nuts as a part of one of your snacks, it tends to stick with you a little longer, gives you another protein source, may help you with some of that sodium loading, and kind of help take away some of those other things that we tend to snack on that are less desirable in that bigger picture.
All right. I think those were kind of all the questions in the chat box. Does anybody else have other questions for Chris? Burning questions that we didn't get to?
Am I still deceptively smart? Covertly?
Yes. So overall, there's no magic one thing to eat, right?
No.
Unfortunately.
The one question I hate as a dietitian, if I could eat one food, what would it be?
What about foods to help with inflammation? So is that necessary? Does a long run mean that we're inflamed and that we need to put turmeric on everything and only eat pineapple the next day? Like how are we supposed to manage our inflammation?
Everything is still a mix, but your fruits and vegetables, your antioxidants are a definite contributor to helping manage inflammation. We also have to consider the fact that we do have a tendency to kind of overdo carbohydrate. It's like, I'll eat all carbs and then not enough protein. A lot of our inflammatory cells are made from proteins. So we also have to make sure that we're getting enough protein in that helps us maintain our immune system and make those cells, as well as eating the antioxidants and things. My favorite overheard conversation from Panera was, I eat so many blueberries and antioxidants. I don't think I have any oxidants. So.
Yeah, so I think that's the hardest part about all of this is that, okay, so Kelly's asking about what foods are good for joint pain. I mean, we know that eating healthy is what is good for us, but then sometimes making those decisions and the health marketing that's out there for you need this supplement or that supplement, it's a lot. It's overwhelming to kind of figure out what the right answer is. So is there something that would be good for joint pain, or is it fall into that category of just fighting inflammation overall?
It's kind of the overall picture. Basically, what you have to do is every time you hear the new diet fad or diet book come out, say, you know, moderation does not sell books. And if I was going to write a diet book, I've always said this, if I was going to write a diet book, it's going to be the 2 to 5 year old diet. Because 2 to 5 year olds have like the best diet quality. 2 to 5 year olds, eat your vegetables, drink your milk, eat your fruit, you know, do all this stuff, clean your plate, all this stuff. You go 5 years old, it's like diet's good crap. Everybody who eats well eats like a toddler. 2 to 5 year old, eating a little bit, not eating too much. I want to get up and run around. It doesn't matter. I have to eat my fruit. I have to eat my this. They're making me eat my cheese, you know, all this stuff. And then as we get out of that, we get further and further away and more marketable. So all of the great fads just don't work for running. Because most of the great fads are targeted on trying to decrease your caloric intake so you lose weight. A lot of the low carb options, for the most part, they're just reducing the amount of calories you eat. And if you eat less calories than you burn, you got to get it from somewhere. So,
So Joan's question is about if you're not able to do gels and Pop-Tarts and stuff, what about like Scratch Labs and more whole foods? Do you use any of the Scratch products?
I do not. But any of the things that you can manage, if you can't do gels, if you find a granola bar that works, because getting in something that's a carbohydrate source is better than running 26 miles without any. So,
and you might have to cut the bar up. Like I know, like a Cliff Bar, it's hard to manage that while you're running, but if you cut it into little pieces so you can take bite-sized pieces, or like a Lara bar or things like that. But I think this goes back to what I said, if I could just snip out the portion of it, is that you have to try it, right? We have to make sure that we are fueling our body. So I love the idea of a 6 mile run, maybe a longer run during the week that you're just out to see how it feels, to then take something with you and try it and then see how your body feels.
Yep.
A lot of times we're just cheating ourselves because we think, well, I don't really need it, but maybe we do.
And you really do.
So awesome. All right. Are there more questions from people? I finally get to see Allie's dog. I love these Zoom calls because we get to see everybody's pets. And I know Chris has a dog too.
Yeah. Fiona never made it an appearance. So
Chris
she makes at least one lick at my face in the process of trying to have a Zoom meeting at home. So I'll just do that.
Oh, there you go. And Chris's wife is actually so talented. She's an artist. And she could have, that picture that was behind him before could have been something that she drew and painted. I mean, she is like super talented when it comes to, what do you call it, landscape? Is that what genre she is? Yeah. I mean, absolutely. There were clouds the other day out and I was like, these are the kind of clouds that Amy paints. Like, it's just like picture perfect clouds. And then so she excels at some of those and trees and everything. So, all right, what other questions do we have? I know we kind of went over our time. Anybody else have any last minute questions? We finally get to see Dave's face. All right. Hey, Dave, finally joining us. It's so good to see everybody's face. Oh, and Mary's puppy is getting even bigger every week, getting a little bit bigger.
I'm not going to be able to hold him much longer.
Yeah. All right, so any other questions for Chris? I really appreciate all your time. It's always good for me to see Chris because we go way back, you know, it's hard to, we can't say how far back because that makes us sound really old, Chris. Really old.
Person that can drink a go.
So I hope that you guys learned something and something that we can take away and really try on our long runs. And I know that this coming up this week, we've got 10 miles for the full group and back down to 6 for the half. It's still really hard to do all of this by ourselves. I think if you guys have watched the news, this just follows through with kind of our line of staying apart and doing this on our own, because we just need to be as safe as possible. I think I've told you guys all my Debbie Downer horror stories from the hospital, and I don't want any of you to get sick. I don't want any of you to be in the hospital. ICU beds went up and hospitalizations went up just this last week. So as things kind of ramp back up again, just be really cautious about what you're doing, and you know, being out there, being safe, bringing hand sanitizer, all those kinds of things, thinking about your route, where you're going to go, how you're going to have fluids. I like Chris's idea of, I need him to pack me a cooler, bring his little ice machine. I mean, that's pretty cool to like have your own little ice packing plant there, but really thinking about that's going to be really hot this weekend, and having some chocolate milk in your car. How are you going to keep that in your car if you're going to be out for 10 miles? And you don't want to drink warm chocolate milk, obviously. So plan ahead, plan for what your fuel you're going to put in your body, and you're going to have more success when you make those plans and you follow through with them. So that's what I want to hear about next week, is about everybody following through with their nutrition plans. So, because Chris, last week we kind of did show and tell, where we all kind of showed what products we use. So,
Brenda, quick question.
Yeah.
Do you think we should be running with buffs or with a mask?
No,
Okay.
I do not. I think that you need to get air in your lungs. You need to be out somewhere where you're not around so many people is really what you need to be. And I mean, I think getting out early so that you're at the park and you're there before a lot of people get there is the key thing. And just go around, you know, go around people so that you're not kind of surrounded by a whole bunch of people. And I know there are pictures out there. Lots of people are running together in groups. I think that we just have to be safe, and it's not fun, but that's what is going to be the challenge of season, is trying to do things on your own and motivate yourself to do it. So wait for the newsletter to come out so you can see what kind of the photo contests, to see what kind of things you're going to take pictures of on your run. And maybe that makes it a little bit more entertaining for you. We also have the book club book. And then, I don't know, people need to share what podcasts and things they're listening to, because there's some good stuff out there. And Chris, I don't know if you have anything you can tell us about for podcasts with nutrition or running podcasts that maybe have some of that kind of information that we could be listening to.
I'm a music runner, so.
Okay. One earphone, right? Not two?
No, I have the bone conduction, so they're both. I can still hear my key rattling in my back pocket. So
okay, all right. As long as you're safe with that. So, but yeah, I think you guys are doing awesome. We had like 27 people join tonight, so I know we've seen some faces that we haven't seen in a while, and it's just always. I just look forward to Wednesdays so much to see you guys and know that it's so much fun just to see your faces. So. All right, I think that'll be it. So thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And thank you everybody for joining. So, all right, good night.
Thank you.